While we know almost nothing about the Riot MMO, one thing I've wondered since hearing about this project is what the arena PvP might look like. To me, there is big potential for an MMO to give arena PvP serious attention and attempt to create an esport surrounding it. There have been very few MMOs seriously attempt to create an esport with their PvP. Most MMOs just tack on PvP as an afterthought or only focus on open world PvP. I like open world PvP as well, but the competitive side of me loves a nice balanced arena team deathmatch. There have only been 2 MMOs that I believe attempted to make a serious competitive PvP environment: Guild Wars 1 and 2 and World of Warcraft. Why have so few MMOs attempted to carve out an esport with their PvP systems? It's hard to say, but I think one of the main reasons is MMOs are extremely complex and making any one system the focus is hard to do. It's hard to devote enough time to make an arena PvP mode as polished and experienced as a MOBA does, since that is the entire focus of a MOBA from the beginning. And MOBAs are just naturally easier to make accessible and beginner friendly. MMOs historically have had a lot of barriers to entry for competitive PvP, and getting into it as a beginner has always been a challenge. We have seen a few offshoots over the years that tried to make MMO arena gameplay into a standalone game. Battle Riot is the most notable example. None of these attempts was a huge success. I think the main reason is not because Battle Riot was a bad game, it just didn't have enough players. Whether it was marketing or a lack of some sort of progression system to keep players engaged, I am not sure. MMOs have alternative game modes to keep people engaged if they get burnt out from competitive PvP, so I think it might be easier for an MMO to build an arena system into an esport than it is a standalone game. The last MMO launch that truly tried to make their PvP an esport was Guild Wars 2. From a very early stage, they made it clear they wanted the PvP to be an esport. They even had shoutcasted tournaments during the beta. But while it did get some traction early on, it never achieved esport status, and now the PvP is nowhere near esport levels. So I think it might be worth looking at what Guild Wars 2 did right and wrong with their PvP. First, I think a big thing they got right is accessibility. Once you finish the tutorial on a new character, you could immediately jump into what they called structure PvP, which is their version of equalized instanced PvP. Another thing they got right is equalized gearing for PvP. The gearing was slightly modified from how it worked in PvE, and every player had access to the same gear sets. This combination of being able to try out every class in PvP and having equalized gear is huge for a competitive player, as it makes it easier to learn the class kits and how to counter classes. No MMO has ever done this, and I think it is incredible. Another thing I think they did a good job with is the limited skill set. Most classes have 2 weapons that can be swapped. Each weapon has 5 skills. Each class has 1 healing skill, since there was no trinity. Each class had 3 utilities and an elite skill. And then you had the class-specific mechanic bar that would sometimes include skills, or other times, like the Elementalist, would change out your first 5 weapon skills based on the school of magic you selected. Now for an esport, this still might be too many skills, as one of the things an esport needs is for a viewer to be able to easily understand what is going on. I personally like having a lot of skills and a complex rotation, but for an esport that doesn't necessarily work, which is why MMOs can do what Final Fantasy XIV does with their PvP, having a smaller kit for their PvP than for the PvE. While Final Fantasy XIV PvP is not anything to get excited about, the way they handle PvP skills might actually work great for an MMO that wants competitive PvP. Each class had a limited, specific set of skills to use in PvP. These were similar to the PvE counterpart skills, but tailored to PvP, and they had less overall skills as well. It has fewer skills than Guild Wars 2, and the lack of customization means balance becomes easier. And it is easier for new players to get into the PvP that way as well. Now, some customization is nice, but the amount that Guild Wars 2 has is too much to balance and makes it more complicated for a new player to grasp. There are a ton of gear choices to consider, runes and sigils to apply to the gear, and traits and specialization trees to fill out. Now, there are templates that new players can use to get started, or players can link in external builds to use. But still, while this customization is great for replayability for established players, it is a high bar for entry for new players. You have to find a balance in order to be attracted to both old and new players, somewhere between Final Fantasy XIV, which has no PvP customization, and Guild Wars 2, which I think had too much, which leads me to balance. And long story short, because of the heavy customization, Guild Wars 2 has always struggled with balance. You need some semblance of balance to have a competitive game. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to be reasonable. There needs to be more than 4 to 5 viable builds for every patch. Another issue with Guild Wars 2 PvP was the lack of Holy Trinity. This led to classes all feeling somewhat similar. The Holy Trinity is a tried and true MMO idea that works. Luckily, the Riot MMO seems to be going the Holy Trinity route. Something Guild Wars 2 did right, but unfortunately it was after launch and after the PvP had already become somewhat irrelevant, is automated tournaments. These, in addition to the structured tournaments they used to run as well, were a good way to promote the PvP to a broader audience. Another thing I think they did wrong is to only have one arena game mode, and that mode being a capture point mode. Now, most esports don't have multiple modes that become esports, but they do have other modes players can play as a change of pace. These are things that Guild Wars 2 did well and not so well. The only other MMO that has had somewhat competitive PvP is WoW. What they got right, to me, is using the Holy Trinity, but to me there are a lot of things they got wrong. First, PvP was an afterthought to WoW. It started as a PvP only game with no honor system, no battlegrounds, no arenas. Arenas were later added in Burning Crusade, and it did get a decent amount of popularity early on. Largely, I think this was just because of the popularity of WoW at the time, and not as much because the PvP was well done. That being said, I still enjoyed the arenas and battlegrounds in WoW and spent a ton of time in them. But some tweaks could have absolutely made it stand out and become an esport. For instance, separating out PvE and PvP balance more, reducing the number of skills and tightening up customization in PvP a bit, drastically increasing accessibility by copying the Guild Wars 2 formula of equalized gearing and levels in PvP, letting players jump into PvP with any class, having a solo queue ranked option like Guild Wars 2 has, implementing some spectating options to make it easier to stream and shoutcast. Here's a controversial take: removing add-on support and making a functional UI that is not so add-on dependent would help WoW's accessibility. This is something I feel Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy both do well. This increases accessibility as a new player doesn't have to worry about installing 10 add-ons to be on the same playing field. WoW has too much CC and not enough diminishing returns. Oftentimes the time to kill is too long as well. Reduce that to prevent 20-minute matches and spending half the match CC'd. Guild Wars 2 was the opposite. I think time to kill was often too short. Ashes of Creation is going for a 30 seconds to 1 minute time to kill, which seems about right to me. The above changes I think could turn WoW into an esport. Guild Wars 2 I think has lost any chance to become an esport, despite what changes they make, as the game as a whole is just not popular enough at this point. So that is a framework for what Riot can do to become an esport. Before I get into my personal ideas for what I want to see in the Riot MMO for competitive arena PvP, let's look at what I think the ingredients are for a game to become an esport. We have already covered most of these to some extent, but let's look at it. So first, the game has to be watchable and understandable, even by those that don't play the game. Yes, they might not get every single thing that is going on, but they at least need to understand the overall idea behind what is going on. Second, the players themselves have to enjoy the game mode, not just after several hours, but ideally very early on. And even harder, players have to still enjoy the game mode after sinking a massive amount of time into the game mode. Third, self-explanatory, the game needs some semblance of balance. Fourth, the game mode needs to be a focus of the devs and not a sideshow or afterthought. It can be a challenge for MMOs to pull this off with all the systems needing to be good, and most MMO players are there for the PvE, not the PvP. So naturally that leads devs to focus more on PvE. But if a game ever truly did the organized PvP correctly, I think that ratio would even out. The fifth one is multifaceted. The organized PvP needs to be accessible and easy to learn, but hard to master. There needs to be potential for outplay. There needs to be comeback potential. Ideally, add-ons are not required to make accessibility easier. The sixth point is that the PvP needs to be rewarding. Now, I don't think it should give you as much in terms of experience and items for your PvE character as PvE does, but some rewards are nice. Guild Wars 2 had PvP tracks, which would give you some cosmetics, character levels, and materials that you could use for crafting and PvE. It was not nearly as efficient as acquiring these items in PvE, which is fine, but overall the rewards and titles for the ranked leaderboard were pretty lackluster. WoW had pretty good ranked rewards, but no PvE progression at all from PvP. But getting the Gladiator title definitely is a big accomplishment, and the rewards match that. The last bullet point is optional: varied game modes. Now, as I said, most esports just have one game mode that is popular, but they often have multiple modes that people also enjoy and play. Capture the flag modes or other objective-based PvP can be a nice alternative to team deathmatch. In an MMO, players that focus on PvP can also jump into PvE for a change of pace. I played more structured PvP in Guild Wars 2 than I did any other mode, and when I got bored with that, I usually just go play another game because I don't find the PvE that enjoyable. WoW PvE I found more enjoyable depending on the version. The older versions I find the PvE more enjoyable, the recent versions have become much less enjoyable for me. So how could the Riot MMO take these ideas and make a compelling entry into the esports world? Well, here's a concept that I think could work. They seem to be leaning in the direction of action combat, which I think is more watchable than tabs, so that is a good start. They likely will have great combat because Riot has always had great combat in their games, another huge plus. Riot is also known for PvP, esports, and competitive play, which is why I think this MMO has so much potential to become the first esport MMO. The Trinity is also likely, which is a plus in my view. Take that starting point and consider the following. Copy the Guild Wars 2 idea of letting players play every class in PvP with normalized gear, talents, and level, but reduce the customization and available skills a bit. Maybe limit the skills to 10 like WildStar did with the limited action set. Maybe allow a few skills to be changed out, but not a massive list of skills to choose from like Guild Wars 2. Some customization with gear choice and talents, but less so than is available in PvE. Separate PvE and PvP balance. Have a great tutorial for new PvP players. Have bot games to get the player up to speed before throwing them against real players. Have a good reward system. Minimal or no add-on support to increase accessibility. Make the PvP easy to learn but hard to master. Make CC skills limited, potentially harder to land but impactful. CC should not be spammable, and CC chaining should be limited. Allow plenty of counterplay in terms of CC break and CC immunity. Make it possible for skilled players to come back when they're behind if the enemy team makes a mistake. Make it fun right off the bat with long-term replayability. Have great spectate options. Sponsor tournaments early and often as a marketing tool until the mode takes off on its own. The main mode being team deathmatch makes sense to me, but have some alternative, less competitive modes that players also enjoy, such as capture the flag and capture points. I really think Riot is sitting on an incredible opportunity to make the first ever MMO that becomes a true esport. If any company can pull it off, it is this company. If they make the competitive PvP as accessible as I outlined, I could absolutely see myself playing this MMO for the competitive PvP only, and playing Ashes of Creation for the world PvP and PvE. It's hard to play two MMOs, but this is a way I could do that. Ashes of Creation arenas are a sideshow with only open world PvP the focus. Riot could capture the instanced PvP MMO fans very easily. I wasn't going to make another Riot video for quite some time, but the recent Riot MMO interest caused me to bump this up on my list of ideas. It's now back to more Ashes videos, and luckily the search volume is on the rise for Ashes as well. Also, make sure you go check out Ebenhart's recent Riot MMO video. He was nice enough to give me a shout out in his video, so I am returning the favor. His videos are really high quality. Outside of the Riot video, I also recommend his Throne and Liberty video. That is all I have for this one. Consider subscribing if you liked the video. With that, I will see you in the next video.